How you doing? Welcome to Blues Club. Hope you're having a fantastic Tuesday wherever you are in the world. Let's do some quick shout outs. Where we're going, we got some Barcelona, Chicago, Queensland, Australia, Slovakia, Rogue River, Oregon, Germany. Well, I can't see those. It's all flashing past a bit fast now. Colorado, Vienna, all over the world. Welcome. Hope you're having a great day and ready to talk about some blues. Now, this is going to be supposed to be about technique, and I think there's a little bit of confusion about exactly what technique meant. And for me, the idea of technique is all about the physical things that you need to be able to do to play music that you want to make, music that you hear in your head. What are the physical things? Being able to like bend in tune. It's no good if you hear a perfect bend in your mind and then you try and play it and your fingers aren't strong enough, or you haven't practiced doing it enough, or your vibrato makes the note go all wonky and wobbly and not staying in tune, or doesn't sound right, or isn't. At any rate, maybe it's not the sound that you hear in your head. Be no good if your hands weren't strong enough to continue playing a 12 bar blues all of the way through. That's like, so there's kind of, for me, the idea of technique is the physical stuff that you need to be able to do on the instrument. So it's much like if you go to the gym or whatever, most people, well, some people like going to the gym just to get stronger and be able to throw more heavy stuff around. That's, for me, is a little bit like the people who play guitar that just want to play like really fast. That's kind of their objective, and they practice playing really fast, and that's the point. For me, that's never really been the point of technique. For me, the point of technique was being able to, I wanted my technique to be better than the ideas, or more. I didn't want to be pushing my technique to be able to express any musical ideas that I had in my musical imagination. Right. So that's always been the kind of limiting thing for me. I always wanted to practice my picking and playing fast, but only to the point where I was expressing stuff that I could imagine, not just playing fast for the sake of playing fast. Which I'm imagining for most of you, if you're here at a blues club and it's not a shred class, you're probably at least somewhere in that same sphere. So the key techniques that you need to think about if you want to play blues guitar, particularly electric blues guitar, the biggest one is string bending. String bending really is so intrinsically linked to blues guitar that it's pretty difficult to play blues without doing some string bending. On acoustic guitar, you do less big string bends. You do
Oops, Justin, you're muted.
How did I get muted?
I'm not sure, but you're unmuted now.
Okay. Where did I when did I go quiet?
Just a
Where
few seconds ago.
Oh, a few seconds
It
ago.
was until,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, no worries.
I haven't just been talking away for like since the beginning of the class. Everyone's going, God, what's wrong with this guy? Anyway, so we were on string bending. So if you've been to any of these blues classes or blues club things before, you'll know that I'm really big on the idea of learning licks and phrases and how important it is that you, rather than practicing just loads of scales and that kind of thing, or concepts even, you really want to think about vocabulary. And one of the reasons that bending is so important in the blues is because it's so often used in the standard blues vocabulary. If you like, you want to hear like, you need that. You need it. That's the lick. It's not. It's okay, but that's the real essence of the lick. Or any of those phrases. It's all bends. You got to get that together. So the key. I'm not going to go too much on a massive bend trip now and explain too much about it. The key thing, the big thing with string bending is that it shouldn't feel difficult. If you get the mechanics correct, it won't be hard, right? So the big deal with the string bending, the way I teach it, and there's loads, at least two or three lessons just on string bending on the website. So if you need to feel like you need to work on this more than what I'm talking about, then do go and research them up. But the way I would explain it to you is if you put your hand like straight down from the parallel off the neck, with your thumb over the top, perpendicular to the neck rather, and if you fold your fingers forward but not your hands, so I'm not moving the rest of my hand, just my fingers forward, and then twist my forearm, I get this big motion you can see there. Now, string bending doesn't quite look like that, but that's the feeling of it. So I definitely recommend you spend a bit of time doing that and get used to this pressing with your kind of forearm rotation that makes the bend, right? So when I'm doing this, it doesn't look like that, right? But it is that same motion. You see, if I bend my fingers over and then just make the motion smaller, that is what's happening, right? So developing a good technique with string bending is really important. I should point out that there are a few people who don't bend that way. Very few. I'd say, did you know that 99.76% of statistics are made up on the spot? I'd say it's about 95% or higher of people use this style of bending. There's a few other rock guys that use bend with their little fingers and do this kind of bending where they use their fingers. The fingers are straight on. And there seems to be a few people with smaller hands. A few women blues guitar players that are playing with their fingers straight on, which I find really awkward. But so the reason I'm telling you that is that if it really doesn't work for you this way, there may be ways around it. I don't know how they do it, or I don't feel like it's the way that most people should do it. So just thought I'd throw that little caveat in there. So string bending, really important. If you're not really sure about it, then go and check out some stuff on the website. Now, the next really important technique for the blues would be vibrato. And vibrato, mechanically, there's a few different ways of doing the vibrato. The first one is essentially the same as the blues bending feeling. So you'd start with a kind of similar kind of position, but you're kind of using that pivot point like that and just wobbling it backwards and forwards rather than it being so much like this big bend like that. You're just doing a little bit of it. But it feels like string bending. It's based off the pivot point with the first finger and the little finger moving. Now, that seems to be the most common type of string bending. But there's another one that's really, really common. I first saw it visually with Eric Clapton do it. Before I'd seen the video of Clapton playing, I was like, oh, I thought everyone did the string bending this way. Then I saw this video, and I saw his thumb was off the neck. And this is, I call it Clapton style vibrato, but there's lots of other people who do the same thing as well. Freddie King is another guy who probably Eric Clapton got this from, but it's literally first finger, everything else on the hand is off, so there's no contact with the hand at all. It's just sitting there. Thumb is usually pointing directly up, and then you're wobbling your first finger up and down. I found that really difficult, I've got to admit. It's something that I've worked on, I still work on, trying to get that vibrato nice. It never seems even for me. As even. And I also get this interesting scratchy fret thing doing it now, which is where you get this more or less infinite sustain, because there's something about the fret. I don't know if you can still hear that guitar note, but I've always wondered why this is. If you're a physics dude, and you can explain to me why after I do this type of vibrato, but not the other type, for a little bit, it seems to make the frets rough, which means I could just keep that note going essentially forever. I'd love to know how that works. Anyway, so there's that type of vibrato, Eric Clapton style or thumb off vibrato. And then you got like the B.B. King thing, which is kind of like the string bending idea. It's often with the first finger for B.B. And I call it a flutter vibrato, or I think B.B. called it a butterfly, because it's like a butterfly's wing. So they're the three kind of most important types of vibrato. And depending on the style of blues that you like or the type of music you'd want to play, I would spend more time on one of them rather than the other ones, or all of them if you've got time enough to spend time on developing all of those different types of techniques. So they're the most important too, but there's other ones that are actually pretty important. Sliding, and specifically the kind of slides where you don't go from one particular note to another note. So you get this kind of... Now it's not... It's... Now, this type of slide is all about the landing note, so I wouldn't worry too much about the starting point. I'm sure technically if I recorded it and then listened back, I'd be able to go, it is starting off that note, or even sometimes just one fret. It's enough to get that going. But those sort of slides, really, really important. Also sliding from one note to another one, so like... So sliding is something else that I feel like is a really important technique to be aware of, to practice, to notice in your own playing when you're learning licks or you're learning phrases and going, yeah, that when I do those sliding, that really sucks, so I need to work on that, and then trying to figure out a way of targeting that particular thing. Other techniques really strongly associated with blues would be slide guitar, i.e. using a metal slide on the strings, which I'm not going to go into today, but there was enough interest on the little survey that went around that I think I'm going to do a specific session just on slide guitar technique. There are lots of other techniques that are important for playing blues that I wouldn't say a specific blues technique, like picking accurately. You know, that's obviously pretty important. Getting a really good quality note all the time. Not letting strings ring out that aren't supposed to be ringing out. So these are kind of general guitar technique things that are definitely going to be important for blues. Raking, actually, that's kind of a blues thing where you do this, where you hit a couple of muted notes. Or an upwards rake. They're kind of getting into the territory of rock a little bit, but so rakes will definitely be in there as well. So the point of me describing these different techniques to you is for you to be aware of what the different techniques are that you might need to work on. And as I've said a few times, learning licks and learning your vocabulary is going to be one of the key things that you should be spending your time on. So as you're doing that, as you're learning licks and as you're improvising with the licks, try and take note of where your technical limitations are. Can you pick fast enough? Can you pick clean enough? Are you bending in tune? Does your vibrato sound good? Just try and monitor that stuff, especially if you're doing one of the things I suggest that you should all be doing as often as possible, recording yourself doing improvisations and listening back to it. Not just recording it. Recording it is good. Listening back to it and analyzing what you played and really trying to dig into what the good things are and what the things are that you need to work on. It's really, really important. It is a little bit physical. So a lot of this stuff is, technical things are things that need to be developed over a certain amount of time. If you've got weak biceps and you want to do something about it, you don't go once to the gym for 5 hours and sit there doing a bunch of bicep curls. Ain't going to work. All that happens is the next day your arm's going to be really sore. That's the only thing that's going to happen. Gain a tiny bit of strength. But the thing with technique exercises is that they're designed to be done over a period of time to allow those physical attributes to really settle in. Even things like string bending, it's a little bit, the repetition of it over and over in tune is what you're looking for to be able to do it instinctively, to be able to get to that right note. So very, very rarely are there technical things where you'll solve the problem immediately. They're nearly always things that you need to develop, so they go on a practice routine and you do them for a month or two. That would be my suggestion for any of the technique stuff. So I think that's enough for me as a intro gambit about technique. If you've got technique questions, specifically technique, the physicality of playing guitar, then drop them in the Q&A box. Remember that there's 2 chat options here on Zoom. One of them is the chat, which is for open chat, like, hey, I can't do this, or how do we do that, or hello, this is where I'm from. The other one is Q&A, which is monitored by moderator. Today it's Fanny, and she'll be checking out the Q&A, and then she'll highlight some. But what I do want to do, as well as the list of different technique things that you guys filled in for the survey, I've got some questions, and there's a decent amount of them, but a lot of them are things that I feel like I can just point you in the right direction of the website. So if you're not finding it, it's obviously I'm not doing something right, because it should be obvious for you to find where some of these answers are. But that's what I figured I would do now. But let me know if you've got any questions. Pop them in that Q&A box, and I'll try and get back to you in a little bit. But first of all, I'm going to go through some of these questions. So the first one is from Don, and he says, using a major key backing track to play over with pinky on fret 8 and index on 5, you'll be playing the A minor pentatonic or the C major pentatonic scale. He talks about the blue note things, but that's not important. The question is how to go between major and minor pentatonic and sound good using a major backing track. So the question now is whether we're talking about a blues major backing track, or whether we're just talking about not a blues one, like Pink Floyd or Guns N' Roses or something. So in a major key, like let's say Knocking on Heaven's Door, just because the chords, it's in the key of G, and it's G, D, C, G, D, A minor all the way through the song, which is very obviously the key of G major scale. So the correct scale to use there will be G major scale or G major pentatonic scale. So when you listen to Slash, that's what he's doing. But you can also, if you're hip with how to do it, you could also rip into G minor pentatonic scale, which is absolutely the wrong scale. But because we're so used to blues, there are points in that sequence where you could get away with using the minor pentatonic scale and make it sound good. But it would take a bit of practice, and you'd have to learn about how to get in and out of things where you're testing the water. So in that sort of situation, I'd be playing the major pentatonic, like I might try a bit of minor pentatonic here, and I'll launch into a bit of bluesy sort of flavor. But before I did that, I'd be so confident with knowing where my major stuff was that if it started to get a bit wonky sounding, I could jump back into safer territory, because it is fun to explore those kind of things as a conceptual exploration, but it doesn't always work well. So it depends. If you're just at home playing on your own, then for sure just muck around and see if you can find the places where it feels good for you to do it or not. There isn't a hard and fast rule, really. In that particular song, playing G minor pentatonic over the A minor chord would probably sound a bit wonky, but over the G and the C, probably get away with it kind of most of the time, but not all the time. And the D, actually. If you're playing a blues, like a major blues, you can play the minor pentatonic scale over the whole thing. The major pentatonic scale, you have to follow the chords, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this in just a second, because Grisha also had a question, so I'm going to tackle that one in a sec when we talk about major blues. Okay. Juan Montez asks when to use the pentatonic and when to use chord tones, and where do you mix them? So I wouldn't tend to think of the chord tones and the minor pentatonic scale. I would just think of vocabulary, of licks, and know that there are some licks that fit better over particular chords, because the ones that fit particularly well over a particular chord are using chord tones. So if you take just classic, or that lick, that fits over an A. So it's a lick, and I know that it fits over A, and it's using A chord tone. So if the chord changed to D, I'd go back to A, E, D, A. So that's a chord specific lick that's using chord tones, but it's not like going because that stuff just doesn't sound bluesy. Using like straight up and down arpeggios or whatever, It really is vocabulary based. If you want to play blues, it's about learning licks, even the more chord specific-y ones. And I dare say, like, this is maybe slightly controversial, but there's a lot of guys that do really complicated technical guitar parts where they're using really complicated scales and ideas, but when you listen to them a few times, there are licks and phrases that they're using. It's not just a lick and a scale, it is phrases. Sorry, it's not just scales, it's licks and phrases that get used. Really good example of this, it's slightly away from the blues topic, but is the Giant Steps by John Coltrane, which has got a very, very amazing solo, very, very technically complex series of harmony that you have to navigate. But if you get one of the more recent editions of the record, or a digital version of it, you get the alternate takes. And you can hear that he's actually using pretty much all the same licks in a different order on the alternate takes. So even an improviser as great as John Coltrane, probably one of the greatest improvisers of all time, uses licks and phrases and jumbles them around. So, like, don't be afraid of this, like, oh, I have to make up my own stuff using the chord tones. Just find licks and phrases that are either based in the minor pentatonic, the major pentatonic, or chord tones, and you sort it. You just put your phrases in the particular box that they belong in and practice them in their right environment. So I hope that makes sense. One, if you're here and that doesn't make sense, pop a Q&A, a question, your follow-up question in the Q&A. Peter asks, arpeggios, trying to use triads between blues licks for improvising. Exactly the same thing that I was just talking about. Even simply arpeggiating through triads doesn't sound or feel very good. Yeah, because it's not a lick. So, like, if there was a time I was using triads or triad shapes, it would still be in the context of a lick. So, let me go to a close-up and see if I can think of some examples. Is that on the... Sorry, I've covered up my little screen that shows what I'm showing. There it is. So that's... It's got a little bit too much gain on. Let me turn that down for a second. Okay. So if I'm playing in A, I'm not going to go... because it just doesn't sound bluesy, but... That's the lick. So I might go. That was a little bit clumsy because I was trying to use it. Or I might go. Which is using A and then G. But again, it's not really, that's not just playing the triad as it is. Actually, a couple of other examples I just thought of. Doing these sort of things. These sixth things. That's like, that's really A. Then I guess it's B minor to an A. But I'm thinking, and I might step. And it is kind of based, at least I'm looking at the triad shapes as a starting point, but I'm not thinking of triad shapes for the playing. Again, licks and phrases. If it's blues, it's licks and phrases. Triads are great for doing like chips. If you're playing in a soul band, that's where you're going to use triads, using these little things like that. There are, if you get into jazz things, there's a little bit more fun you can have with what they call superimposing triads, where you use triad extensions. Don't know if I quite want to go into this, but you might use a... it's not a triad, and this is probably beyond the scope of what's going on here, but if you can use a C minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio over an A7, and that gives you this kind of A9 sound. So I think I used that earlier. This is, again, look, this is, that's the arpeggio. But I wouldn't play that in a solo, but I would play. So now I'm going C sharp minor 7, flat 5 arpeggio, actually with the 9, and then sliding up to that major third, and then try it. So I don't want to go on about it too much, but it's just a lick. It's got a fancier birthplace because it's a C sharp minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. Woo! Fancy big long chord name. But really, I don't even think of it as an arpeggio. It's just a lick that I would use over an A chord. So it's kind of an A7 chord specific lick. So I really feel like that's important. Peter also adds in I can bend in tune most of the time. I can do vibrato wobblies, but struggle to add vibrato on bent notes. There's a lesson on the website of bending vibrato or adding vibrato to bends. I can't remember exactly the title. If you type in bend and vibrato together, you should find it. It's all about doing the bend and then relaxing and then pushing back up. It's one of those technical practice at a bunch of times to make it work properly. Slide. I don't want to go into slide now. Let's do a whole session of just on slide in this class. I'll get my resonator out, the shiny one up there. That'll be a fun session. Okay. Juan's ask another one. He snuck a second question in there. I hadn't noticed there were two from him. Phrasing techniques and how to practice phrasing. But it's a very good question, so I'll give it here. So phrasing, if we say that licks are words or little collections of words, then when we're thinking about phrasing, we're thinking about sentences, like how to construct a sentence so that it makes sense in blues. And there's some really interesting things. Another popular question on the multiple choice survey was about structuring a solo and how you structure a solo. And one of the things that I think that you'll find really helpful is to try and look out for any form of structure in solos that you really like. Because if you start paying attention to that, you'll start to notice the way people use repetition. That's the most common tool that you can use for developing a solo, is not thinking that it's just play lick A, play lick B, play lick C, play lick D, because it doesn't say anything. It'd be very much like if you had a conversation with someone, we're listening to somebody speak, and they didn't keep coming back to the same topic. If everything they said just changed from one thing to another and there was no continuity there, it wouldn't make sense. And there's a really interesting interview with Stevie Ray Vaughan. It might be on the interview with him and Albert King together, or it might have been somewhere else, can't remember. But it was, he talks about a thread. And he said that you need a thread to weave a solo together. And the audience might not be able to get what the thread is. Right? They might not hear, it might not be obvious to the audience, but you know what it is. And even if it was like, I don't know, licks that I learned yesterday could be your thread. And as long as you know that there's a thread, the audience will somehow get that there's some intention behind what you do and it's not just prattling off licks. One of the things that I always do when I'm improvising is I have some idea of somewhere where I might go if musical imagination doesn't just turn on the flow. So very often when I'm doing lessons or I'm doing these live things or whatever, I'm not in that real flow state where my musical imagination is firing and it's all coming out in a thoughtless way. I'm usually thinking about what I'm doing. So that in that case, I'll usually have some idea or a concept that I'm aware of, and it could be exploring slides, it could be exploring bends, it could be adding chords between little bits of solo, or it could be trying to just mostly use my third finger, it could be a particular vibrato, it could be anything. But I'm just having one little idea in my mind that I'm going to focus on during a solo will help make it sound coherent, because I'll keep revisiting this one thing, and even if the audience doesn't immediately recognize what it is, they'll sense it. And it could be as much as you'll find certain soloists keep revisiting the same lick during a solo. So if you listen to like Freddie King or T-Bone Walker or even Stevie Ray Vaughan, there'll be certain licks and phrases that get repeated during the one solo. and sometimes Stevie Ray's kind of good at this. There'll be often licks that'll appear in one song that you hardly ever hear in other songs. So there's this real sense of developing of an idea within a particular solo. And I often think of it in terms of writing poetry. So if words licks are words, then we've got to put them together in sentences. But we're not just trying to make up boring sentences like you might do at grammar school. We're looking for creative use of the language, which is a better analogy would be poetry. So rather than always just thinking of phrases like a sentence, you might think of it as a stanza in poetry. And again, the stanza has form. It has a rhythm to a stanza. There's certain points where it would want to rhyme if you're looking at kind of traditional poetry. Obviously, contemporary poetry does away with all of that, but most of the time. So I think that's a really interesting way of doing it. This idea of repeating a lick and how often you repeat it, and having this recurring theme. They're things to think about, but if you think about it while you're playing, you'll start to realize things. And I still feel like the best way of learning that is analyzing solos that you love. So the solos that I love the most would be very different, or possibly different to the ones that you connect with the deepest. So analyze the ones that really resonate with you, and you'll probably find more of the answers. Okay, hopefully this is all making sense. Jane asks, I find first string bends much more difficult than second or third strings. Any tips for improving this? So my suspicion will be that the angle of the fingers is somehow awkward. So I can't see you do it. If you're around and if you've got a guitar to hand and you're happy to film to go on camera and actually I can see it, then put your hand up in the room and I'll get Fan to pop you on to show me. But I suspect it's going to be to do with the angle of your fingers, because when you're on a thinner string, they're a little bit more of an angle. So it could be that, or it's most likely to do with the pivot point not quite being in the right place. But if you're here, Jane, put your hand up if you're happy to grab a guitar and demonstrate the problem. That's a hard one for me to guess at. David asks about the adjacent strings getting trapped under the bending finger or right up under the nail and ring out. How can this be avoided? So where the strings go when you're doing a string bend, it's a very good question, very, very common. Let me just zoom in a little bit here, see if I can get this. Where's my focal point? Sorry. It is there. Okay. So when you go for a bend, what he's talking about is if you go for, and I have real trouble making myself do it, but sometimes you get the other strings fall underneath the finger, and then you can hear them, or they go up, and I can't really do this. I have to change it to make it happen, but you get the strings come up over the finger. Now this still isn't close enough, is it? Hang on. It's as close as I can get it. Let's see if we can get that there. So it's either here where they get bunched up under the finger and you get more than one note, or it's here and I can't do it, like I said, I have to make this happen, wrong string there, and they go up over the fingers like that, and you end up with problems there. Particularly if they go over, it's when you bring your hand back down, it rings the note. So it's all to do with the angle of the finger. How am I going to be able to show this one? This is a really difficult one to demonstrate. So it's to do with how flat or arched your finger is. So what you don't want is the nail on the string to be able to get underneath the string. So in order to do that, you need, if that's the problem, you need to flatten the finger so it's a little bit more that way. And if it's too flat, that's when you can bunch the strings up underneath. Right? So if I'm like that, if my fingers are too flat, as I go there, that's where they bunch up. So in this case, it's in between it being flat like that and being perpendicular, if that's the right word. So they don't want to be too much like that, and they don't want to be too flat. It's in the middle. So what you want to do is experiment with exactly where that is, because where they'll bunch up is on the end of the finger. They will kind of bunch up, but they won't bunch up underneath. They'll bunch up in a kind of muted way, as opposed to where they're actually played. They just sit on the, they sit on the end and they're muted. So Sorry, I'll go back to the one there. See, when we did that, any of you here for the club with Joe the other day, he's got the same little switcher as me, but he does it with his feet. I haven't set mine up yet, but that's the future of camera switching, is having the little buttons on the floor to switch between the different cameras. Top tip there from Joe. Anyway, so when it comes to string bending, you want to think about the angle of your finger in relation to the fretboard. If it's, if it's too flat, then you'll get the strings falling underneath the finger, and if it's too high, that's where your nail gets close enough to the fretboard to lift the strings up. It is a tricky one, and it requires a bit of experimentation. It does seem like it's one of those problems that affects a small percentage of people, but for them can be a bit of a pain. So just give it some time, experiment, and see if you explore that finger angle and see if that doesn't solve your problem. I suspect it will. Okay, Grisha asks, major blues scale, chord change equals change of scale. A major pentatonic does not fit over the D7, the 4 chord. What to do? Change scale. Yes. So I have a lesson on the website called, and I want to say it's called How Not to Suck at Playing the Blues with the Major Pentatonic or something like that. And it is all about changing the scale. So the minor pentatonic, you can just rip through the minor pentatonic over the whole 12-bar blues and it doesn't matter. As soon as you want to play the major pentatonic, you have to either change from, on the 1 chord, you play the major pentatonic. So I'm using this pick feel, so it's a bit triangular. Anyway, so if we're playing a blues in A, I'll just stick in the key of A just because it's nice and simple for us all to understand. So in the key of A, I'm thinking major pentatonic, minor, back to major, back to minor pentatonic. Now, the change, I should have explained before I did a little demo. The change is happening when I go to the 4 chord, because if I keep playing the major pentatonic, the A major pentatonic scale over the D7 chord, I'm going to be playing the note C sharp, which is the suckiest note over a D7 chord. So you have to learn to change. Yes, that is the whole thing. As you progress in your blues playing, you're going to find that you change the things that you play over each chord. Right? You'll change scales or you'll change phrases. Very rarely would I play the same phrase over an A chord that I'd play over a D chord or an E chord. Right? It seems really daunting. If you're fairly new to blues improvising, you're probably like, hey, I'm really happy I can play the minor pentatonic and some licks over this. It sounds really cool. And it'll be cool for a while, but then you're going to start going, oh yeah, but hang on, over that D chord I could do this and that. And the longer term, the end result of all of that is that you're going to want to change all the time. Every time there's a chord change, you're going to change the phrases, and the pool of licks, the pool of resources that you've got is going to be different on each phrase. So over like a quick change 12-bar blues, A to D, back to A, that kind of thing, you're going to think A major pentatonic, A minor, major pentatonic, minor pentatonic. We're on the D7, back to major, to E, So every step of the way I'm changing. Now, you can either change between the A major pentatonic and the A minor pentatonic, so go on the minor pentatonic for the D and the E, or as I started to do toward the end, you can change the whole shape. And to make it really obvious, I'm going to jump around the neck. Just, it's not how I would recommend that you do it, but it'll hopefully make the point. So I might go A, D, A, D, A, D, D, A. So I kind of sucked that last little lick there, but anyway, you get the idea. It's moving the phrase around with the different chords. So you've got the right idea, just practice moving around. Okay, John, notes that connect one chord to another chord. Not exactly sure what you mean. I would think in terms of licks for individual chords rather than just notes joining one to the other. I'm sorry, I'm Not clear enough on that. Kevin asks, playing solos over chord changes. So if you're following the thread along now, you've kind of got this idea that there's licks and phrases over particular chords. So that's what happens. The more you play, the chord changes become more of a way of changing your pool of licks and phrases rather than it being like some scary, horrible thing. It's why a lot of people that get into blues transition through blues and get into jazz, because when you get into jazz, you're changing the pool of notes for every single chord, and they're not just dominant chords. So in the blues, you tend to have like licks that work over the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, and then other licks, maybe just it's the most basic level. In jazz, you're going to be thinking about each chord individually, and you've got a much broader range of tools that you can apply to any particular chord sequence. You can think of a group of chords together, and you've got phrases that kind of run over the top of the whole lot, that kind of start inside the harmony, go outside and create a lot of tension, then resolve themselves. Or you can play just I'm not a very good jazz guitar player, so excuse this dodgy attempt at it, but like on a basic jazz progression where you had like C, A7, D minor to G7, really common, 1, 6, 2, 5. You could play real chord tonesy stuff. That's C, A7, D, G. Sorry, that sucked. C, A, D, G, C, A, D, G, C. So over each one of those chords, you're having to change the line that you're playing. So I think for me, one of the best thing about learning some jazz is that it made blues seem a lot easier. So again, when I was talking about technique, for me, I want to practice my technique so it's above what it is that I want to play. So for me, learning about jazz, as much as I love playing, well, mucking around as a hobby jazz guitar player, I really enjoy doing that. But for me, the musical thing about it is that it's made the whole idea of playing over chord changes a lot less scary. So for me, playing the changes in a 12-bar blues are not really like, they're not really even playing changes anymore. They are. And it won't feel like that if you can't do it. But if you get into jazz, they become so seemingly simple that you feel more confident, and then you can play more naturally and more relaxed without, like when I try and play jazz things, I go into intellectual overload and I'm like thinking too much. And the more you think, the more you stink. So I end up sucking at jazz guitar. Okay, what is a good practice structure to improve blues technique? So everyone has different things they need to work on. Some people are going to be great at bend. Some people are going to work on bad at vibrato. Some people are going to struggle with breaks or slides or whatever, or bending, whatever the thing is. So you need to find the things that you need to do. And I talk a lot about practice, like little 5-minute practice blocks. Just make a list of all of the things you need to practice for 5 minutes each. Grab your timer out when it comes time to practice. 5 minutes, let's go. But do try and find things that are immediately relative to the things that you want to play, because that way it'll inspire you to do it. Practicing things where you don't really see the point of practicing that thing is just really boring. It's a really good way of putting yourself off guitar practice. So think about that. And I've got lessons on structuring a whole routine. If you want to check out, if you again search for the intermediate practice routine, I think Fanny is going to try and collect up some of these links to the various lessons as well. So hopefully she'll find that one, because that would be probably a helpful thing too. Okay, how am I going for time? I've got 15 minutes left. I'm not even half the way through the questions, but I might have to leave it at there. And let's see. Fan, how are we going in the live thing rather than just answering a whole bunch of questions? But I'm hoping that was... I picked those questions thinking that that might be common kind of questions. Okay, Fan.
Yes.
Is there much in the Q&A department?
There is. So
okay.
If you want me
Are there any common themes there? Cheers, by the way. Non-alcoholic beer, because it is a Tuesday night.
We do have some questions about muting strings. If you want to give some tips for that, I can give you a specific question from PETA. Can you
Okay,
give
that'll do.
some
Yep.
pointers on techniques for muting using the strumming head? He's a lefty, so left hand for him, but yes, we have a couple of questions about that.
Okay. So muting strings, muting unwanted strings, very common problem. Real pain, especially if you start playing with any volume or gain, having strings ringing out. So I think it's one of those techniques where if you overthink it, it can make all of your playing sound really stiff and kind of weird. So what I'd like to do is share with you how it works. And then if you've got a problem with string muting, when you notice that it's happening, stop and think like, what have I done? What can I do to fix this? Whose hand is responsible? Whose hand? Which hand? That'd be funny if it's somebody else's hand responsible. Which of my hands is responsible for doing that muting? And then try and fix the problem, and then wait for it to happen again. And if it happens again, redress the problem and just continually try and figure it out, because the principle itself is fairly simple. Go to close up one again, which is here. So if I'm playing a note, this note, this finger's job is to play that note, but it's also muting the thinnest string. It's also muting the third string. So if I hit the thinnest three strings there, then there's no note. But these ones, they are going to ring out, and they become the job of this hand. So now I'm strumming all of the strings. Okay, so this part of my palm is resting on the thickest three. Then it's the tip of my finger and a little bit of my palm actually there on the third string. I've got the note, and then the underneath is with the first finger. On the thinnest string, obviously it requires a little bit more palm. Moves down a bit. Now here on the third string, first finger's happy to mute two strings. On the fourth string, first finger's happy to mute even more. And again, the palm is going to be taking care of the rest. So when you think of it that way, like that's the job of first finger, but it's the job of first finger even if you're using other fingers. So if I'm playing here, first, well, it's a bit of third finger as well, but first finger is the one I'm thinking of. If I'm here, this is definitely first finger is covering those thinner strings, not the third finger. Okay, so first finger is always a little bit more flat than the other fingers and always hanging around to mute any of those other strings. And then any of the thicker strings need to be covered by the palm. You can use your thumb over as well. So there are some songs, there's quite a few songs, but where you might want to get your thumb over, and the combination then becomes this. Sometimes you use these other fingers on the thicker strings, but I'm going off on one here into dangerous territory, because what I want you to do is have the standard one and work on that. The idea that the first finger is going to mute all of the strings toward the ground from the string you're on. The palm of your hand is going to mute all of the ones that are physically higher than the note that you're on. Like I said, there are some instances where that doesn't happen. I'm just thinking like Le Freak or whatever. If you're playing. I'm not doing any muting with this. This is just going. But it's still really, it's first finger's doing all of that muting here. And the third finger, the tip of it's muting the fifth string, and the thumb is muting the thicker string. And here, thumb is definitely getting involved here with the fifth string, but second finger's also. It doesn't look like it's quite touching, but you get the idea. There are other things going on. You just have to find out who's the culprit here. Whose fault is it that string is ringing out, and then figure out how to stop it and try and aim for it not to happen again. But don't overthink of it. Overthink it. I wouldn't recommend that you sit there going like specifically trying to practice doing the string muting like that. I would, as you encounter it, try and figure out what you should have done in order to mute those strings, and then you might give it some practice on a particular phrase or a particular idea, and think about it. Have a look and go like, well, how am I going to mute that note when it happens? There are other techniques. As a lot of the rock guys use this kind of thing where they'll play one note and then have the first finger laying down on all of the strings. Okay, that's a real rock thing. When you've got lots of gain going on, and it becomes really like gain, I mean distortion or whatever, like high volume or a lot of gain, or fuzz or whatever. You need to be really mindful of that, the strings ringing out. So that's where some of those other kind of techniques come into play. It's not something I use personally a great deal, if at all, unless I'm doing very specific kind of phrases or learning a particular tune. So again, that's another reason why I feel like it's important to put things like this, exercises like this, into practical application of things that you want to learn, because you don't want to sit and spend hours and hours of your life practicing a technique that you don't need to do because you read in Guitar Magazine or saw a clip on YouTube of some guy said everyone should mute like this. It's like, well, yeah, everyone who wants to play like you maybe should do that. But what if you want to play different? Like, you need to find the things that are going to help your guitar playing, and not just follow along to what other people say. Find it for yourself. Find your problems and then look for solutions to your problems rather than looking for problems that don't exist. Anyway, okay. Hope that was helpful. Fan, hit me with another one.
Okay. Sorry. What is the best technique to play triplet notes?
To play triplet notes?
Yes.
Okay. So triplets are groups of three. And there's not really a specific technique that I associate with triplets. If you think there's the beat, da, 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 that a triplet's going to go one triplet, two triplet, three triplet, four triplet, one triplet, and it could be, you could play a group of three like. You could do like a pick, flick, flick, pick, flick, flick. I guess the trickiest part of triplets is that because it's dividing a beat into three. If I quite often talk about doing a down pick on the beat and an up pick in between. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up. And when you've got a triplet, you can go down on the beat and then up. But then if you're going to go down on the next one, then you've got to go up on the beat. So down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. 1 triplet, 2 triplet, down, up, down, up, down, up. So that part of doing triplets can be a little bit weird. The solutions are many. It depends on the phrase that you're going to do. A lot of guys that, and again, we get into this thing that I keep touching on, like pick slanting and pick directions, and whether you pick down and up or in and out. But a lot of the technical players will do things like they'll play pick, pick, flick, pick, pick, flick, pick, pick, flick. Pick, pick, flick, pick, pick, flick. Because it's easier than going pick, 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 pick. That's hard. Pick at everyone, but pick, pick, flick, pick, pick, flick. I haven't practiced this stuff for ages. But it is easier to do pick, pick, flick than it is to do down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. So I'm not really sure if I can give you a really concrete answer on the right way to do triplets, because there are many different solutions to this, the triplet rhythm, and it kind of just depends on what it is that you want to play, or how you're playing it, or there's too many answers. Sorry. Okay, probably got time for another one or two there, Fan.
Yes, we have a request from Toby if you can demonstrate some string rolls.
some
or
string rolls.
string rolls. Yes.
String rolls, not spring rolls. We're not
No,
going to
not
the
string
Chinese shop.
rolls.
No, okay. No, I know what he means. Okay, so rolling between strings is the idea of moving one finger over where one string gets muted and one string gets played. I think to do that, I'm going to have to go back into full-on close-up mode on that cam. So that's actually not bad. So let's say that we're trying to play these two notes. This is a really good example of doing a roll. So I'm using the knuckle from going from kind of flat while I'm playing the thinner string to the point on the second string. And at that point, the thinner string is now muted, right? When I'm playing the second string. When I go back to the thinner string, now the second string is muted. Because if I held them both down together, we don't want that. So this is a string roll, as opposed to a spring roll. This is a string roll. And it's all about the knuckle there, the movement of the knuckle. This is probably my favorite exercise to practice this. So I'm just playing, it's minor pentatonic. Play 8th fret and then rolling with my little finger, then the first finger. Then I'm going little finger to third finger, so it's not a roll on that one. Second string, third string, then third finger, middle 2 strings. You can see there, you can hear clearly I'm getting 2 individual notes with the same finger. Now, that's actually a really good example of this idea of using a phrase that you want to learn and then figuring out that there's something wrong or a technique that you need to develop and then finding an exercise or developing an exercise that helps that problem. Because I had a problem with doing those string rolls. There were lots of times I was learning songs or phrases where I was using my first finger as a bar, and it was even, you know, this. That lick, it's not, I mean, it can be. If you're doing Chuck Berry, you can let it ring out. But if you want the individual notes, it's a roll. I really struggled with it. And so I can't try and remember where I got that exercise from, this thing, whether it was a teacher or whether it was in a book. I can't remember, to be honest, but I remember finding that exercise and realizing, hey, this is exactly practicing that thing that I'm struggling with. So then I practiced it. It went on the practice routine. I did it 5 minutes a day for God knows how many months. And then suddenly I could do that, and that technique wasn't as much of a problem anymore. So then you start looking for another one. So continually finding these new problems and then trying to work on a solution to that problem is, I think, a much better approach than thinking that you need to fix problems that you don't even know are there yet and working on stuff like that. Like, I spend so much of my life playing things and learning things that I don't use and that I don't really feel were relevant to what I wanted to play. And I just did them because I thought I could. And it was, when I was growing up and learning guitar, it was obviously way before the internet. So it was just books and magazines. So you'd get things like Steve Vai's 10-hour workout in Guitar Player magazine or whatever, and you'd read through it and pine over every detail and try and construct something, because that was the most current advice that anyone had about getting good at guitar. So I think now possibly we're in the realm of it being too far the other way, where there's too much information and there's too many people passing themselves off as experts in stuff. So it's a bit hard to tell sometimes when something's really true or whether it's got some ulterior motive or there's whatever. Internet's kind of getting to be a funny place these days. But so it is hard to find the truth on what you should practice. And therefore, the solution to all of that little rant is, if you look at yourself and try and figure out what your own problems are and then just address those problems rather than just trying to address all problems or ones that you read about somewhere that somebody else thinks that you should practice. That's how I take it anyway. I think, and we're all so busy these days. Who's got time to practice things that aren't going to be immediately beneficial to our playing? Um, okay, so I think we're about there. Um, yeah, I think we're there. I don't think we've got time for any more questions today, unless there's anything super pressing. Fan, we everything all right? We can
No,
survive.
yeah, we'll post the remaining questions in the community. So we'll send everyone an email with that, and you can discuss it there.
Okay. And if I can, I'll try and pop over and answer some questions over on the community. So the questions that didn't get answered today, I'll try and pop over to the community forum later on. I forgot to mention, so I was supposed to mention it during the spiel, and I just forgot. As you guys may or may not realize, these clubs are completely kind of free. But they're not completely free for me to make. Like people like Fanny need paying. There's a lot of admin and hours and stuff that goes in the back. So if you felt that you enjoyed this workshop or little club and you would like them to continue, I'd really appreciate a donation. I'm not going to push it for you if you can't afford it. Of course, it's not a problem. The amount that we're suggesting as being a good amount would be $5 if you're enjoying these sessions and you want to contribute to help them expand and grow as the years go on. Then yeah, really appreciate hitting that donation button. There's going to be a link in the email that you get sent afterwards, and I think Fanny was going to try and put a link in the chat there, but I was supposed to do that in the middle of the session. I completely forgot because that wasn't really on my mind. But yeah, I would appreciate your support because I think this club thing is a really fun little adventure. It's a new thing, obviously, only a few months old, and it is one of those things where, I'd like to grow it and get more clubs going on, but we have to make it wash its face. I'm not trying to, profiteer that much from it, but at least kind of cover the costs of, the admin stuff. Quality people like Fanny don't come cheap, right? Anyways, on that note, Fanny, thank you very much for looking after all of that and dealing with the emails and everything else. Thank you all for coming along, and I hope you enjoyed this little club. Don't forget to sign up on the Blues Immersion landing page, which, Fan, I think you can pop in that email as well. The course that I've been talking about quite a lot, we've delayed the release until June because it's turning into such a massive undertaking that I just don't have time to. I don't want to put the pressure on myself to release it and then be struggling to keep up. So that's going to be launched in June. But if you sign up on there's a landing page there somewhere that Fan will be able to put in the email. If you sign up as being interested in it, you'll get notified first. And I think we're going to do a few exclusive little lessons for people on that list as well. So you might want to go and check that out as well. I think that's it. So, yeah, have yourself a fantastic day. Actually, I think Jedi Master was going to come along today. I'm not sure if Jed was still here or not. But hello, Jed. If I haven't seen you for a little bit,
He
hope
was there.
everything's going really well. Huh?
He was on the chat. I don't know
He
if
was
he's
on the
still there,
chat.
but
There we go.
yes.
Okay. Oh, I've just seen at the top of my screen there. Magana's there. Hello, Magana. How are you? Hey, I haven't seen you for a while either, my friend. Hope you're keeping well. I can't see everyone on my screen, so please don't think I'm picking out favourites there. There's only a little space for 4 up the top there. Anyways, have yourself a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another blues course. And I think we've got a theory one coming up soon as well. You'll find out information about all of the different clubs that are running, and all of the ones done with the other awesome approved teachers as well. Have a fantastic day. Ciao.